Let me call this hearing to order. We're here today to examine the implementation of the drinking water and wastewater portions of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And you'll recall this historic bipartisan law is helping to deliver clean drinking water to millions of households and schools across our country. Before we do that, though, let me start by saying how grateful I am to both the panels of witnesses who are joining us today, including representatives of drinking water, clean water, as well as small and large utilities. And we're particularly appreciative that Assistant Administrator Radhika Fox, who leads EPA's Office of Water, has joined us. Welcome. And to all of our guests, we have a lot of folks who did a lot. Senator Capito and I don't think we've done that many photos before a hearing in a long time, so we want to remember this day. Yesterday, the Biden administration took a major step in addressing the presence of toxic forever chemicals known as PFAS in our drinking water. And this announcement was some 20 years in the making. It's an issue that's very important to, as it turns out, to West Virginia and to Delaware, and frankly, to all the other 48 states across the country. I want to commend the President, I want to commend Administrator Regan, Assistant Administrator Fox, and all of EPA for proposing a thoughtful, science-based national drinking water standard for PFAS. It's a critical step to protecting our drinking water comes on top of the President calling for significant investments to protect our public health and environment in his proposed 2024 budget released last week. In his budget, the President requested more than $12 billion for EPA at $1.9 billion, or 19% increase from 2023's enacted level. More than $4 billion of that proposal is reserved for water infrastructure. That includes an additional $219 million for grants to reduce the amount of lead in drinking water, to test for and remove lead in schools, and to replace lead pipes. This budget builds on the committee's work in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law to invest in our nation's water infrastructure, which brings us to the topic of today's hearing, oversight of the implementation of the drinking water and wastewater portions of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. As we have discussed, the Democrats and Republicans on this panel, it's not just enough to enact landmark legislation like this, but it's important that it be appropriately implemented and that we exercise our responsibilities with respect to oversight, and that's part of what we're doing here today. But our work in this committee to improve our water infrastructure is personal to me. It's rooted, we have some folks here from West Virginia that have joined us. Welcome. If you're from West Virginia, raise your hand. If you would like to be from West Virginia, raise your hand. Almost everybody, for the record. Our work in this committee is to improve our water and infrastructure, as I said, is personal to me. Rooted in my faith and my family's history in Raleigh County, West Virginia. And some of you may recall that Matthew 25 calls on all of us to care for those that are in need, the least of these, to give those that are thirsty something to drink. And for me, this includes ensuring that Americans have access to clean, to safe and reliable water services. Some of you may recall I was born in Beckley, and a coal mining town in the southern part of the state. And for 2 of those 6 years that we actually lived there, in my first 6 years of my life, we lived alongside a stream. Our ranking member has heard of Beaver. She's been to Beaver right outside of Beckley many times. A creek that goes through there, they call Beaver Creek. And my sister and I lived alongside Beaver Creek. And we would play along the banks of that creek. We tried to catch small fish, sometimes frogs, and we were never allowed to eat any of them. And nor were we allowed to drink the water from Beaver Creek. That's because many of the nearby septic tanks were not well maintained. And as a result, raw sewage and other pollution could seep into that creek. At the time, our situation was not too different from that of many other small communities in West Virginia and across the country. In the years that followed, our government responded to this water crisis by creating grant and later loans, programs that made it easier for communities across our country to build and upgrade their drinking water and wastewater treatment systems. Over time, these programs languished and were in dire need of updating. And that's why I, along with our ranking member, Senator Capito, Senator Cardin, Senator Loomis, Senator Duckworth, Senator Creamer, and many other members of this committee and off of this committee, joined forces to address this need. And we worked in an overwhelmingly bipartisan way to draft the Drinking Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Act. You'll recall that our legislation included historic investments in EPA state revolving funds. Those funds are the primary vehicle for state and local governments to finance water infrastructure projects throughout America. We advanced our legislation out of committee unanimously, and later passed it out of the full Senate by a vote of 89-2. If the American people are looking for bipartisanship, they need look no further than this committee and its work on infrastructure. This water bill, combined with our committee's historic highway legislation, road, highways, bridges, served as the foundation of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which President Biden signed into law in November 2021. Happy day, I think, for all of us. Bipartisan Infrastructure Law invested an unprecedented $55 billion, that's $55 billion with a B, dollars to improve drinking water and wastewater systems in communities across our country, and it was paid for, fully offset. This remains the single largest water infrastructure investment in our nation's history. Let me repeat that. This remains the single largest water infrastructure investment in our nation's history. Now, EPA has the responsibility of putting these dollars, these investments, to work for all of the American people. Today's hearing is an opportunity to gain a deeper understanding of how this process is going. This hearing will also allow us to explore future opportunities to improve the way we invest in our drinking water and wastewater infrastructure. That includes investigating how the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law programs are benefiting communities with the greatest need and what additional authorities or changes might be needed to make the program function better. I like to say everything I do, I know I can do better, and as proud as we are of this legislation, we know that we can still improve on it further. For example, is there more that could be done to adapt these programs to changes in our climate, in our population, and the age of our infrastructure? As I said earlier, we look forward to hearing from our distinguished panels of witnesses today. Before we do, let me turn to Senator Capito for opening remarks. Senator Capito, you're recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here today. I'd like to thank the Assistant Administrator Fox for not just being here today, but for the lines of communication that you've kept open as you promised in your hearing when you came before this committee. You've stayed true to your word. Certainly appreciate that from my perspective. I would also like to thank you for finally, after many years of me banging the gavel and the gong, and also with the chair to set that safe drinking level for PFAS. That's going to have many impacts across the country, but certainly safe, clean, and healthy water is at the top of the list for all of us. So this committee values your perspectives on the challenges and the other witnesses as well facing this nation's water infrastructure, as well as your insights on implementing the effective solutions to these challenges. Today's hearings focus on a topic that is critical importance, and the chairman has covered much of this, to the health and well-being of our communities, our environment, and our economy, clean and efficient drinking water and wastewater systems. All Americans deserve this. We deserve to have reliable, affordable water and sanitation, which is, I am very proud of the bipartisan work of this committee that we accomplished in the last Congress to address America's drinking water and wastewater investment backlog. It's such a backlog. The WEA Act, as we call it, was written by this committee and is a key pillar of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Created new programs, opportunities, and support to address current water infrastructure needs and ongoing challenges in small, rural, and disadvantaged communities. In this hearing, we will explore the current state of our nation's water resources, the challenges that we face in protecting them, and how we can implement policies in the IIJA to help ensure that every person has access to clean drinking water. I look forward to hearing from our expert witnesses and engaging in a thoughtful and productive discussion on this crucial issue. The IIJA authorized $55 billion in funding, as the chairman said, the largest investment ever, for a range of water infrastructure programs, including grants for small and disadvantaged communities, funding for lead service line replacement, and support for innovative water technologies, as well as funding for wastewater treatment and stormwater management. These funding opportunities provide new resources to address the current challenges facing our water's infrastructure. Many communities certainly in our states, are grappling with aging infrastructure that is in need of repair or replacement, while others are dealing with emerging contaminants like PFAS that require specialized treatment technologies. At the same time, small, rural, and disadvantaged communities often lack the resource and technical expertise needed to address these challenges, leaving us very vulnerable to water quality problems and public health risks. IIJA programs offer a wide range of funding opportunities to help address these challenges, from grants and low-interest loans to technical assistance. These funds can support critical infrastructure upgrades, including the replacement of lead service lines, the construction of new treatment facilities — I've actually toured some of these, as I think you have — and the implementation of advanced treatment technologies. Additionally, the funding can support capacity building initiatives, including workforce development. Every water system I go to is really down on the numbers of people that are interested in working in water, but also the retirements that we're seeing across the board in the workforce is really putting a strain on our systems. So we need to help there. We need to help communities build the expertise needed to manage and maintain their water systems, and quite frankly, we need to get the next generation excited about this as an opportunity and a career of the future. Despite these significant funding challenges, ongoing unmet needs in small, rural, and disadvantaged communities still remain a concern. As they said, they lack some of the technical expertise. As we work to implement these programs, it will be important to ensure that the resources are targeted to the communities that need them the most and the necessary technical assistance and training programs to support them. As the EPA begins to deploy these significant financial investments in our infrastructure, I have concerns about how the agency is planning to implement some of the directives from Congress. We were very explicit in our bills, I think. The Biden administration has prioritized environmental justice agenda, but it has not been shy to pull in, I think, political factors as they're doing that are unrelated to water quality and health, key conditions for how this money should be spent, and even funding for states as it's reviewed by the agency. I'm concerned that projects will not be considered based solely on needs related to the explicit statutory directives of safeguarding human health, keeping rates affordable, and protecting the environment. While all of us support empowering communities through economic development, it's important that we recognize that federal investments through the Safe Drinking Water Act and Clean Water Act, as amended by the AAJA, should be directed to projects where the needs are most acute and align with what Congress directed the agency to do in the statute. We shouldn't be sidetracked from responsibly investing in our aging infrastructure because we have such a historic bipartisan success here. Water systems do not align neatly with the administration's effort to use census tracts to define EJ communities or politicizing the distribution of funds. We've run into this in West Virginia in some of the definitions. Congress was clear. Funding through WOTUS should encourage state flexibility through funding pots like the SRFs, and other grant programs should prioritize the need. Funds were firewalled between systems of various sizes to make sure that rural communities, small towns, and big cities all got their fair share without taking a too big a slice of the pie. The EPA should implement these programs pursuant to the congressional intent, which was resulted from some hard-fought bipartisan compromise. I'm committed to working on these issues that are so important to me, citizens of West Virginia, and our country. I'll close by saying what everyone in the attendance knows. Water infrastructure investments are critical to public health, environmental health, and economic development. And I want to see these new investments create a better quality of life, create more jobs, and drive the kind of quality of shared health benefits that we all care about. I also want to welcome in the next panel Kathy Emery from the great state of West Virginia, and also Raleigh County. And she is here with her husband, Roy, her son, Taylor, who goes to West Virginia University, and her other son is a graduate student at West Virginia University as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. To our visitors from Raleigh County, my grandfather, great-great-great-grandfather, was one of the co-founders of Raleigh County, so our family was present at the creation. It's a special honor to have you here with all of us today. I ride back and forth on the train just about every day to Delaware, and the other day I was talking with someone, and he used these words. He talked about integrity. He said, integrity, if you have it, nothing else matters. Integrity, if you don't have it, nothing else matters. And the same, I think, could probably be said of water. If we got it, we've got good, clean drinking water. It's not that nothing else matters, but it's hugely, hugely important to sustain life. And as governor, and I know my other colleagues have spent a lot of time on economic development, job creation in their states. I never talked to a business, large or small, who's looking to locate or expand a business, was interested in doing so in a place that didn't have good, clean drinking water. I mean, it's just critical in order to have be as successful in job creation and really maintaining those jobs. With that having been said, it's now time to hear from our first panel. Joining us today is Radhika Fox, Assistant Administrator for the United States Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Water. In her role, Assistant Administrator Fox works to ensure that drinking water is safe, wastewater is safely returned to the environment, and surface waters are properly managed and protected. We thank you for the work that you do. You're recognized. You may proceed at this time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Thank you so much, and good morning, Chairman Carper, Ranking Member Capito, and members of the committee. I'm so honored to join you to provide an update on EPA's implementation of historic water infrastructure investments through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And really, I just need to start by saying thank you. It really is the bipartisan leadership of this committee that was so instrumental in securing over $50 billion to invest in clean and safe water in communities across America. I also want to take a moment to express my gratitude to the incredible career staff at EPA who are really the ones implementing this. I have some of the leadership from the Office of Groundwater and Drinking Water here with me today, and it's really because of their dedication, their technical expertise, their hard work that we are delivering on the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law promise to the American people. So let me give you a brief report out on how implementation is going at the EPA. So Congress provided the majority of the water funding through the State Revolving Loan Funds Program, the SRFs, about $43 billion. And in March 2022, EPA issued our SRF implementation memo. That document established key priorities consistent with the legislation that has really been our North Star for how we have been implementing this bill. Other key priorities that we outlined in that SRF implementation memo were, one, to provide flexibility to states in meeting their local water needs, increasing investment in disadvantaged communities, making rapid progress on lead service line replacements, addressing PFAS and other emerging contaminants, advancing climate adaptation and mitigation, and supporting good jobs here in America. We engaged very closely with the states as we developed this implementation memo. We have a state SRF work group, and that has really set the foundation for a robust partnership with the states in implementing the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So, here we are about 1 year later, and I'm delighted to report that 47 states and 6 tribes and territories have received nearly $5 billion in SRF funding in the first year. So that's a big number, and I want to talk for a minute about what that means for people and for local communities. For example, because of these investments, Sierra Vista RV Park in Arizona will be able to remove arsenic and nitrates from their drinking water. Local government leaders in Sussex County, Delaware, will be able to connect hundreds of homes to a regional water system, which will also protect nearby marshes along the Delaware Bay. And in Pittsburgh, we're going to remove nearly 1,000 lead pipes in low-income and working-class neighborhoods. So those are just a couple of examples of the thousands of projects that are going to be funded by the SRFs. That is the real deal that we're delivering to America because of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. So let me touch on a couple of other highlights. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law also established the Emerging Contaminants in Smaller Disadvantaged Communities Grant Program. And just a few weeks ago, we announced the first $2 billion of funding available through that in a non-competitive basis to all the states that want those resources. Very excited about that. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law is also investing nearly $2 billion through the agency's geographic, national estuary, and Gulf hypoxia programs. These investments are so wonderful. They're supporting conservation, restoration, infrastructure programs to protect some of our nation's most treasured waters, the Chesapeake Bay, the Great Lakes, the Mississippi River Basin, the Gulf of Mexico, the San Francisco Bay, really just quite remarkable. We're also working, because of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, to ensure that our groundwater is safe. We're providing $50 million to help states develop and implement underground injection control Class 6 programs to support carbon capture and sequestration. We have a letter of inquiry that process underway where states can seek these resources if they want primacy of the program, and we're going to be awarding funds to states by the end of this year. I want to conclude my remarks by emphasizing something that both you, Senator Capito, and Senator Carper said, and that is that we are really dedicated to ensuring that all communities benefit from this investment. We know that there are too many small communities, too many rural communities, too many underserved urban distressed areas that have not received their fair share of federal funding. And we can and we must do better. That is our focus at EPA. So in addition to all of the work to get these resources out to states and local communities, we have been standing up the most significant technical assistance program because we think that is what will change the odds for communities who haven't been able to get their fair share. We're actively working in communities across the country, from McDowell County, West Virginia, to Lowndes County, Alabama, to really communities all across the country. We have 29 environmental finance centers who are providing free technical assistance to communities that want it. We have our Closing the Wastewater Access Gap initiative. We have our lead service line accelerators. So all of these technical assistance programs are helping build that local community capacity to make sure we're unlocking these resources for every community so that every community has clean and safe water. So let me just end where I began, which is to say thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity to steward these resources. It's because of Congress and President Biden that you have created a transformational moment right now, a transformational opportunity for the water sector. And I want you to know that EPA is working hard. We're working strategically to deliver on the vision that you set in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. We're working to make sure that water funding benefits all Americans, no matter where they live, how much money they have in their bank account, or the color of their skin. So I want to thank you again for the opportunity to serve the American people in this way, and I look forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much for being here today and for your leadership and for the hard work that is being done within EPA on especially on these issues. I again want to say to our staffs who are sitting behind us and those who are back in their offices how much we appreciate their work on these issues as well. And Madam Senator. My ranking member here, our ranking member, I just want to say again how proud I was of our committee last week with our hearing and on the derailment in East Palestine. I thought was a wonderful hearing and bipartisan and penetrating, and something that sets the stage for making sure that the people of East Palestine and that part of America are treated the way we would want to be treated. So very, very proud, and thank you for all of that. Let me start with some questions. If I can, from Ms. Fox. And, well, you know what, we've already mentioned PFAS a time or two in today's hearing, but I want to just return to it. But EPA yesterday released, as we know, the proposed drinking water standard for 6 types of PFAS chemicals. I want to commend you and Administrator Reagan for your leadership in proposing a standard that is based in science and a standard that protects the public to the maximum extent possible. These forever chemicals are prolific throughout the environment, and under President Biden's leadership, EPA has taken another significant step to address their presence in our water with yesterday's decision. Question, can you, Ms. Fox, can you please give us some more background on the standard and explain the next step for the agency's action in this regard?
Thank you for the question, Senator. And I want to thank you and Senator Capito and other members of this committee that have kept us focused on getting this, this drinking water standard proposed. I was talking to Senator Capito yesterday. I said, in the 2 years that we've had conversations, I don't think there's a single time that we spoke where you don't ask about this. So we're really, truly thrilled to be at this key milestone. So the science on PFAS is clear. Exposure, even at very low levels, is very harmful to human health. And what we also know about the science is that people are exposed to PFAS from a variety of means, from their air, their land, and their water. But when PFAS is in drinking water, we know it is one of the most significant contributors to the harmful health effects that people face. So, as we think about making progress on this critical issue for the American people, having a national drinking water standard that keeps PFAS out of our drinking water, that is one of the best things that we can do as a nation from a human health perspective. We're very proud of the proposal that we announced yesterday. It is based in the latest peer-reviewed science, and the science is evolving rapidly as it relates to PFAS. So it's grounded in the latest peer-reviewed science. And it also learned from, the dozen states that already have established MCLs for PFAS in drinking water. As you said, Senator, the proposal calls for regulating 6 PFAS. We're proposing to set an MCL, a maximum contaminant level of 4 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFOS. 4 parts per trillion is the level at which we can detect PFAS in our drinking water, and we have laboratory capacity to do that. We also are proposing to regulate 4 additional PFAS as a mixture, because these 4 PFAS are known to co-occur in drinking water. This is Gen X, PFBS, PFNX, and PF8, anyway, alphabet soup of PFAS. But with those 4, we're setting a hazard index for those 4 PFAS. Also, some of the other features of the rule proposal that we're very pleased with is the public notification requirements, which is so important so that the American people can know. We, I think, have developed a flexible approach to monitoring and compliance, recognizing that water systems are in different places. The next steps are we're in a 60-day public comment period, so we're very much looking forward to engaging with our state co-regulators, local water systems, community organizations to get feedback on this proposal. And we are really working hard to get to a final rule by the end of 2023 or very early in 2024. And so again, thank this committee for your wonderful leadership on PFAS.
You're welcome. And it's a shared responsibility. As you know, we all serve on multiple committees. One of my committees is having what we call a business session right now. They need me there for a quorum. And I've asked Senator Capito if she would preside in my absence. She's graciously agreed to do so. And to keep an eye on Senator Kramer in my absence. I know it's a big job. But thanks for your response to my question. And Senator Capito, I'll be back as fast as I can. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Assistant Administrator Fox, you and I talked about this yesterday on the phone, and this is a bit in the weeds, but you came out several months ago, or maybe a year ago, with what was called a health advisory level for the PFOAs, which were so low that unmeasurable. Systems are were unable to measure as to what the EPA was saying would be a health advisory level. You come back now with the safe drinking, the MCL, which I'm really pleased that we're here today to talk about that, at 4, and it's significantly higher than what you previously said the health advisory level would be. And so I asked this question: how did you what science was the basis for these health advisory levels? Yesterday or a day before, 1,800-page response from you and the EPA, which was difficult to go through because it had a lot of attached reports and everything with it. But what I'm worried about is the risk communication. What does this mean to somebody who's actually trying to determine if their system is safe and how it's going to impact the health and the drinking water standards. And so I'm going to actually submit questions to you in writing because this is going to get a little bit technical, and I don't want to take up all my time on technicalities. So if you could respond to those when I send them, I would very much appreciate that.
Yes, happy to.
Great, thank you. Let me ask again on the PFOA and PFAS issue. So we've set the drinking level. We're going to probably have requirements for systems to test to this level and compliance. There's going to be a lot of instances of what you would call a passive receiver, somebody who basically a water system who receives the water from a source and passes the water on, and maybe the level is a little bit higher. And I'm worried about the liability issues. I know you're not in charge of CERCLA, but have you all thought about this and what kind of issues we might be addressing here at the Congress in terms of the passive liability issue for PFAS?
Yeah, so you're correct. Thank you for that question. So on the CERCLA hazard designation, that is, of course, in our Office of Land and Emergency Management. But, you know, one thing that is, I think, particularly exciting about how we are approaching the issue of PFAS at the agency is we really are taking a whole-of-agency approach. So the Office of Water team has engaged closely with the Office of Land and Emergency Management on these issues of passive liability. And, you know, certainly drinking water systems, wastewater systems, you know, PFAS has entered these systems, and they're not the responsible party. So as that CERCLA hazardous designation rule continues to move forward, the agency is thinking about enforcement discretion and what's appropriate, just as we do with other CERCLA designations. You know, right now, though, is such an exciting moment to be moving this drinking water rule forward because we also have the resources in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. We're working very actively with states and local communities to make sure that the $9 billion that you all dedicated to addressing PFAS and emerging contaminants is out there, that water systems are accessing those funds, getting these treatment technologies in place. And so I think that's going to make a huge difference as we move forward.
What would you say to every state in terms of the retention of the flexibilities that's built into the systems on the revolving funds? Once those revolving funds leave D.C. and go to our states like West Virginia, is all the responsibility in the state then, or I mean, that's what I would prefer. How do you see that?
So I really see it as a partnership. You know, we have been very clear in our implementation memo around the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law that we value the flexibility that states have always had with the SRS. And Senator Caput, if you look at the thousands of projects that are on these intended use plans, they are so diverse. They're funding drinking water, wastewater, stormwater, small projects, big projects, cybersecurity. So the states are very much in the driver's seat in selecting the projects that really meet the needs of their residents. So I think we have preserved that. But it's also a partnership. So, and it is our obligation as for oversight and to make sure that states are utilizing these resources in a way that's consistent with the legislation and the statute. So, an example of that is around disadvantaged communities. So one of the things that we talked about in the SRF implementation memo is, we summarize that, of course, states are the ones that determine definition of disadvantaged communities, both on the clean water SRF side as well as the drinking water SRF side. To be helpful in that implementation memo, we laid out criteria that tend to be good criteria that states are utilizing in those definitions, and then ones that are maybe more problematic. And what is so exciting is that a number of states sort of chose to amend their definition of disadvantaged communities, and so we're seeing this trend line of those definitions really being consistent with the statute, the Safe Drinking Water Act, the Clean Water Act. So ultimately, it's a partnership, but yes, absolutely, the states are in the driver's seat in selecting the projects that best meet the needs in their borders.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that answer, and I think part of your answer sort of went to what my opening statement was saying, that the states need to be in the driver's seats. The states are going to be able to make the best determinations. And I think what we've seen, not just at EPA, but also over at transportation, is the administration's putting the foot on the pedal here at in certain instances and suggesting certain parameters that then lead to, I think, our states wondering if we don't go the way that, the EPA is saying, then, or we're going to have some kind of, I don't want to say penalty, but are we being guided by other issues that really, if we were doing it on our own, we wouldn't be doing it quite this way. And so I think that's a cautionary tale. So, Senator Kramer.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you, Administrator Fox, for being here. And I have a lot of things to thank you for, so bear with me as I do a little bit of that. First of all, I don't think it can be overstated how important your trip to North Dakota was in 2021. And while we had a robust discussion about the WOTUS rule, and I will want to ask you some things about that here in a little bit, probably the most fun was nerding out a little bit, right, with the locals and the state water people. You're going through a water plant. It was wonderful. And I think most importantly, you listened to people and related to them. And so I just thank you for that trip. It meant a lot, both the nerding out and the WOTUS stuff. But I also want to thank you since then. You've remained connected and you've always been available when I've had a question, and I've tried to answer the calls when you make them, and every now and then we just bump into each other. And I think it's important that people see that relationships matter, even where there's disagreement. And I appreciate that. But you also, you and your team clarified some things for my constituents in pretty short order for a massive bureaucracy like yours, and I want to thank you for that as well. As you know, working with the SRF, the State Revolving Fund provisions of the infrastructure bill, our state agency that oversees SRF, along with a variety of other stakeholders, of course, in the water sector, raised concerns over the effective date of the Build America provisions. In particular, there were different effective dates for WIFIA and SRF. And of course, these obviously different programs, same agency, but different programs, but similar goals. And that kind of confusion oftentimes relates to chaos, and sometimes people just throw up their hands and give up. But after a couple of inquiries with state officials, your team reconciled the effective dates. Imagine that, a good, simple solution to the issue. And it's going to allow projects in North Dakota, and I presume other places, but in North Dakota to move forward. And I want to thank you and your team for clearing that up. It's good public service. I do want to ask, and I know this isn't about waters of the U.S. necessarily, but we don't get the opportunity often enough. And I know that Administrator Regan will be in front of us for the really tough questions. We'll spare you those. But I wanted to bring up a couple of issues, because at that same meeting in 2021, we heard from stakeholders. And since the agency unveiled the rule, I've heard from a lot of those stakeholders, constituents and others who are concerned that the new rule really embodies some of the same government overreach of the 2015 rule. I know there's some distinctions, and you're certainly going to clarify some of them, I'm sure. But I've also, anything that defers to the bureaucracy, we just get concerned about, because we've never really met a regulatory agency that didn't regulate when given the opportunity. But also concerning was the rules shift in applying the burden of proof. And this is a very specific issue, the burden of proof on the landowners for proving that their land is non-jurisdictional. So in these jurisdictional questions, can you just explain why it does that? I mean, the previous rule, the Trump rule, in its preamble states emphatically that the burden of proof is not on the landowner, but rather on the agency. And your rule seems to have flipped that. Can you explain that to me a little bit?
Yes, happy to. And I just want to thank you for your hospitality. It was a wonderful visit to North Dakota. And And I appreciate the feedback around the team's work with your state SRF program. I have to say, Senator, North Dakota is doing a fabulous job with implementation of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law resources. They've already taken all of their CAP grants for year one. They're moving fast on their intended use plans, and so it's been a great partnership. There's going to be some great projects that are funded in North Dakota, and I can't wait to come back out for some of those groundbreakings as well. But, on Waters of the United States, thank you for the opportunity to clarify this question that you raised. And frankly, thank you for hosting me in North Dakota. We just received so much valuable information from the wide array of stakeholders you brought together on Waters of the United States. I'm really proud of where we landed on this rule. I think both in my confirmation hearing, Administrator Regan, when he had his confirmation hearing, we both talked about how our priority was to stop the ping pong with Waters of the United States and to put forward a balanced rule that provided clear rules of the road to farmers, to ranchers, to landowners, to developers, and we have done that. Our rule is not the Obama Clean Water Rule. It is a much more narrow definition of waters of the United States than the Obama rule. It is not the Trump Navigable Waters Rule either, which was, as you know, vacated by multiple courts and was off the books as of August 2021. One of the things that we really focused on in the development of our rule was practical implementation considerations. That is what I heard when I was in North Dakota. And on this landowner question, a couple of things that I would share. So one is that as part of our 2023 rule, we have a whole landowner's guide that makes it very easy for landowners to understand what is, if a permit might be needed or not. We also have worked closely with Army Corps where they can provide free jurisdictional determinations to any landowner that asks for them, and to do that quickly. So that's a key feature. I think one of the things that I'm most proud about as far as our 2020 rule is we also clarified what's out. So in the rule, we codified 8 exclusions that we heard in places like North Dakota are very important. For example, with prior converted cropland, this is something that so many farmers and ranchers have said it's confusing. And so we, in the rule, have made that a categorical exemption, very clear. And we partnered very closely with USDA on that because we thought it was also really important that our definitions between different agencies are aligned. And that is why USDA is so supportive of this particular rule. And then finally, again, this focus on implementation versus fighting about the definition, at the federal level is really a priority moving forward. So one thing that we did is as we as we issued our final rule, we also issued a series of implementation memorandums. Some of them are between EPA and Army, where we're doing trainings to make sure that there's a consistent understanding of this definition. We also have a coordination MOU with USDA, again, on how do we make sure some of these programs are aligned for the agricultural community. So, Senator, I believe that we delivered on what we said we would do. No more ping pong. Let's find the center. Let's give people clear rules of the road as it relates to waters of the United States, and then also to make sure we're protecting those vital water resources. So I hope you see that we have struck that balance. We certainly have tried.
No, I appreciate that, and I'm sure I'm the last Republican that'll ask you about WOTUS today. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Cardin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate it very much, and let me thank the Administrator. Thank you for your leadership on these issues. I appreciate the engagement you've had with our office. These are exciting times. We have opportunities that we have not seen in generations to deal with our water infrastructure. We all know the current status of our water infrastructure, whether it's drinking water or wastewater. It's not where it needs to be. We consistently get grades that are unacceptable. I use Baltimore City as an example. Baltimore City had the best drinking water system in the world 100 years ago. And unfortunately, some of those pipes are still in the ground today or being used. So we have challenges in Baltimore. We have challenges throughout our country. And one of the major parts of the bipartisan infrastructure in increasing the resources going into our state revolving funds was to direct your efforts to traditionally underserved communities, communities that have an affordability issue in regards to doing the necessary infrastructure that is critical to both drinking water and wastewater treatment. So tell me how you're going about reaching those communities that have had challenges in the past, being able to afford the necessary improvements into their water systems, carrying out the intent of Congress.
Thank you for that question. So we're doing a couple of things. One is, one of, I think, the most exciting features of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law is that you all provided about, 49% of resources must be spent for be put out as grants and principal forgiveness in disadvantaged communities. I think your vision in designing the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law has unlocked so much potential, because the challenge, right, Senator, is that disadvantaged communities often don't have the financial capacity to access the loan aspect of the SRFs. So by putting so much money out as grants and principal forgiveness, you've removed one of the critical barriers that these communities face. But we know that just having the resources available isn't enough. So that's why we have stood up the most ambitious technical assistance program alongside the capital projects that we're funding. We have built out our environmental finance centers. We have 29 of them. Every region, EPA region, has an environmental finance center, as well as national ones. They are basically available to any community that wants technical assistance in order to access the SRF funds. And, as we design that technical assistance effort, I thought about when I worked at a local water utility. I was at the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission, and there we had access to all of the best engineering, design, financial planning. A disadvantaged community doesn't have access to those things, but they need that in order to get these SRF funds. So we're basically making that available to any community that wants them. We just opened up our TA webpage, so I'd love to share that information with the committee so that you could share that with your constituents. And so we're going to be helping thousands of communities access these SRF dollars. But really, that is the core of the strategy, providing that technical assistance support so that these disadvantaged communities can build their technical, financial, and managerial capacity.
And I will follow up with you as to how that's being implemented. We have jurisdictions like Baltimore City where the ratepayer support is just inadequate to deal with the needs that we have because of income. And then we have communities like Smith Island, which are so isolated that they just don't have the population to be able to support the water that they need without greater assistance. So we have different needs in our state. I'm sure that's true throughout the country. Technical assistance would be critically important, but also making sure the resources get to those communities. So please keep us informed, and I'll be working with you on that. I want to ask you one other question about the low-income water assistance program. We provided $3 million in the FY23 omnibus for you to conduct a low-income water assistance needs assessment. Senator Wicker and I have worked on the realities that water bills are beyond the capacity of many payers today. We have a low-income utility assistance program under LIHEAP. Well, we think there is a need for one under water. How are you implementing that needs assessment?
Yes, thank you for that question, and you're absolutely right. This issue of water affordability, even though the $50 billion in funding from the federal government will make a huge difference, water affordability is a growing challenge in communities across the country. And, in my former role as the CEO for the U.S. Water Alliance, I helped create this water equity and affordability network. As to the assessment, we're going to partner with HHS in the development of that assessment, since they're managing managing the LIWAP program. We're currently designing the methodology for that assessment, and it's going to get underway very soon. And I'm happy to keep your office, Senator Cardin, Senator Wicker's office is up to date on how that assessment is going. In addition to that, we are working closely to support HHS as they continue to administer the LIWAP program, which we're so grateful was developed by this Congress.
Well, thank you. I appreciate if you keep me informed. Madam Chair, I have a request, a unanimous consent request on behalf of the chairman. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from the American Sustainable Business Network, which represents more than 400 businesses that rely upon clean water. This diverse coalition of businesses includes breweries, mattress companies, and farms. The letter expressed opposition to efforts to use the Congressional Review Act to overturn the 2023 WOTUS rule.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Senator Lummis.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairman, and welcome, Administrator Fox. I was so pleased to hear Senator Kramer compliment you on the relationship that you formed with problem solving in North Dakota, and I'm hoping you can help me similarly with a couple issues I have today that I'd like to discuss with you about sanitary survey results. My office has heard repeatedly from constituents that are frustrated with delays from the EPA on sanitary survey results. I have close to a dozen towns or small water systems that have waited some as long as 26 months to get survey results that were conducted in the summer of 2020. These delays make it really difficult for these communities because some are getting results not long before a new survey is required. So can you commit to getting the survey results out within better time frames? Ideally, it would be 60 days after completion, but these surveys take a long time for these communities to fill out, especially small water systems. And then there's this huge delay, and they need the feedback sooner because as soon as they get these results, they're plowing into another survey.
Well, thank you so much for making me aware of this issue. And yes, you have my commitment that I will personally look into the 12 water systems that you mentioned that are waiting. I mean, the sanitary survey, you're right, Senator, it's a very important tool that states and local water systems, the EPA, utilize. And local water systems need that information in order to make key operational maintenance management decisions. So yes, I will commit to looking into the situation with these 12, as well as just looking more broadly into the timeline that for returning that information.
Thanks very much. I really do appreciate that. I also have another question about the topic of sanitary surveys. Madam Chairman, I'd like to enter into the record a letter asking unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter to Administrator Regan dated January 25th, 2023, concerning the EPA's memorandum to state drinking water administrators on public water systems cyber security.
Without objection.
Thank you. So this letter addresses the EPA's plan to add cybersecurity requirements to the sanitary survey program. Now, we all agree that cybersecurity is incredibly important for water systems, but it is doing it as part of the sanitary survey program that has raised issues. The organizations that signed the letter I just entered into the record have called that plan ill-advised, impractical, and not designed to meaningfully improve system resiliency. EPA's approach is also legally flawed. That's what the letter says. And then they go on to ask for the EPA to recall the memorandum. The signatories to that letter include the American Water Works Association, National Association of Clean Water Agencies, National Rural Water Association, U.S. Conference of Mayors, National Association of Counties, and others. So obviously this has received a lot of review from local governance, and they're concerned about just using the this survey as the source for gathering that information. Can you talk about what outreach was done concerning this memorandum?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. So, Senator, you're absolutely right that cybersecurity threats to water systems, it's a growing concern. It's happening with more frequency. There are bad actors out there, and this is a significant vulnerability to our water systems. We believe that in order to protect our water systems from cyber threats, we have to take a multifaceted approach, and that's exactly what we have been doing at EPA. For example, we've been encouraging water systems to consider using SRF funds to do those cybersecurity upgrades. In the president's budget, he's requested an additional resources for a grant program to help water systems get in compliance. We do many trainings and resources that are out there all the time. We feel that this implementation memo that I recently issued is also a critical part of the solution. The sanitary survey is really the primary tool by which a state can really assess the operational capacities of a local water system. And given the critical nature of having good cybersecurity practices, we felt that this needed to be, in this modern age, one of the operational considerations that states look at in these surveys.
And
we had a very robust process. We actually, ASDWA, the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators, we had a work group process with them. They reviewed the memo. We had many consultations all along the way. And we're not just issuing a memo without support. There's a whole series of resources that are being developed, key questions that can easily be added by the state to these sanitary surveys. So we think this is very doable, very achievable, a good key step forward to protect our water systems from cyber threats, which again are growing.
Well, and I would encourage you, because of the letter that was addressed to Director Regan, to have more conversations with the local implementers, because it's a pretty broad association of locals that are saying the sanitary survey program is just the wrong tool to have this dialogue. So clearly there's some sort of disconnect going on between the local implementers and EPA on this, and so I'd ask for your careful reconsideration or at least extending your dialogue with those folks. My time is up, Madam Chairman, and I'll submit a question about drinking water loss in municipal systems due to faulty and leaky infrastructure, and just ask for a response in writing. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Olmos, thank you for those questions. And next, we've been joined by Senator Kelly. Senator Kelly, good morning and welcome.
Good morning.
You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So good morning, Administrator Fox. Nice to see you here today, and thank you for the conversation we had yesterday. I want to start off by discussing the recently finalized rule by EPA and the Army Corps on the definition of waters of the United States. As you know, there's been a push by some in Congress to use the Congressional Review Act, a CRA, to repeal this rule. And now, you and I, we discussed some of my concerns here and those of Senator Sinema. The two of us, we sent a detailed letter to EPA and the Corps last week with some specific implementation questions. But I wanted to talk for a minute about what would happen if the CRA passed. So we're going to have a vote on it. So if it passed, I want to start with a few yes-no questions. So if the 2023 WOTUS rule were repealed, would the Trump-era Navigable Waters Protection Rule take effect?
No, it would not, because it was vacated in August 2021 by a federal court.
And would the 2015 Obama-era WOTUS rule take effect?
No, it would not.
So my understanding is the rule that would be in effect would be something similar to the pre-2015 WOTUS guidance. Is that correct?
That is correct, Senator.
And, you know, that guidance, my understanding is that it relies on the same types of significant nexus test as the WOTUS rule that EPA and the Army Corps finalized this January. Is that right?
Yes, but there are key differences in how we approach it then in that 20.
Can you explain those differences?
Yes, sir. So the CRA, if it were to pass, it would, as you said, put us back to the pre-2015 definition of waters of the United States. That definition is broader than the 2020, our 2023. Our 2023 rule is more narrow in the definition of waters of the United States. It is more uncertain, and so there would be key challenges. With a CRA, we would, you can't sort of take parts of the rule that work and parts that don't, that, people might have concern. It wipes out the entire rule and puts back in place the 2015. So we would, for example, on the question of the two tests, significant nexus and relatively permanent, in our 2023 rule, significant nexus is much more narrowly defined than in 2015, and it would be utilized only in a very small number of waters, whereas it would be much more broad in 2015 versus 2023. Another challenge of if the CRA would pass is that many of the exemptions and exclusions that I was talking to Senator Kramer about just a moment ago, those would all be voided out. And because the CRA says that agencies cannot ever adopt a rule that's similar in the future, we may never be able to ever bring back things like prior converted crop or exemptions for artificial ponds, things like that. So it really would create confusion, uncertainty, and void the very common sense aspects of the rule that we work so hard to put in place.
So the things we did in the 2023 rule that actually made it narrower,
Yes.
if we go back to the 2015 and we do it through the CRA process, in the future we couldn't use those same items as you just addressed to get a more narrower definition of waters of the United States.
That is correct. The agencies are prevented from issuing anything that's similar.
So, yeah, this took us a while to, sort through. It's not an obvious, thing, how sometimes you can be, through a CRA process, you're trying to get an outcome that might be narrower, and in fact, you have some unintended consequences. And I think that is the case here. Is that your sense?
That is absolutely the case. We would be throwing out a narrower definition of waters of the United States. We'd be throwing out all of the implementation direction that we provided. We'd be throwing out the collaboration memos between USDA and EPA and Army Corps that will help with good implementation. We'd be going back to a broader definition of significant nexus. It would create a great deal of uncertainty in communities across the country. We believe it would lead to delays in permitting important projects, permitting infrastructure projects, development happening on land. And so it's not the right tool. We can always improve on waters of the United States. We welcome that conversation with this committee. We are also laser sharp focused on doing implementation work in a way that addresses the regional differences across the country. We lose all of that if this rule gets CRA'd.
Thank you, Administrator Fox. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Kelly, thank you for that line of questioning and for, I think that's some important points were made there. And Ms. Fox, thank you for your responses to them. I mentioned this earlier, and one of the things the business community looks forward to is certainty and predictability. And that's always been the case, and it's, I think, case still. Okay, I think, Senator Ricketts, you've been patient. Thanks a lot for joining us. We've been joined by Senator Sullivan as well, but you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Chairman Carpo, Ranking Member Capito. Thank you very much, and Administrator Fox, thanks very much for joining us. And as governor, one of the things that I'm previously having been governor, one of the things that I'm very well aware of is water infrastructure and how challenging it can be, and as Senator Cardin said, not just for big cities, but also, especially in Nebraska, small rural communities. Obviously, the EPA has on Tuesday released its first national standard for 6 PFAS levels for drinking water. Small water systems, again, often don't have the technical capability for dealing with these and implementing these sort of monitoring requirements. How do you plan to assist small water systems, especially maybe in rural areas, for doing the testing compliance to be able to comply with this rulemaking?
Thank you for that question. And this is a huge priority for us in the Office of Water. How do we broadly make sure that smaller water systems, rural systems, benefit broadly from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and everything that we're doing on this question of PFAS specifically? There's a couple of things. One is that we have recently started our UCMR 5, which is a ongoing monitoring program. And historically, larger water systems, do that. It's harder for smaller systems. Yeah. We advocated for resources so that smaller systems could do that. And because of the generosity of Congress, we have resources now to work with smaller systems on that. In the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, there's a new $5 billion grant program that is dedicated to small systems and disadvantaged communities to basically look at issues of PFAS and other emerging contaminants. And so that's going to be resources that are dedicated to the very communities that you're asking about, Senator. So those resources can help on and they're grant programs, so you don't have to pay anything back. And they can use that for testing, for remediation, implementing treatment technology. So that's going to make a huge difference. But what we have learned in our work across rural America is that just getting resources, making resources available isn't enough. You've got to support smaller systems, rural systems, in building their technical, financial, and managerial capacity to be able to both get that grant or get that loan and then be able to implement it well. And that's why we're spending so much time building out the technical assistance infrastructure. We have 29 environmental finance centers. We've actually increased our contracts with National Rural Water and with RCAP, the Rural Community Assistance Program, because they have direct touch points in rural America. So they're going to be doing even more technical assistance in these areas. So that is some of what that we have underway, and we think it's really going to change the odds in rural America.
So how will a small community be able to access some of those resources you're talking about?
So we have just put up a technical assistance webpage on our website. So I'd be happy to share that information with your office if you'd like to get it out.
Please do. Yeah.
But then also we're working really closely with the states. Many states also have technical assistance programs, so we're trying to coordinate and I mean, your environmental secretary, your SRF state manager, they're going to know the communities that are out of compliance. They're going to know the communities that are keeping them up at night, as it relates to clean, safe water. So we're asking them. We're building this list of communities, and then we're not waiting for a community to come to us. When we hear from a state or from a local water system, if something is of concern, we're having our technical assistance providers actively reach out to them. So we have to go to the community, not just wait for them to ask for help.
Great, thank you. I'm running out of time here, so I'm just going to talk about another thing that we're talking about with some of the investments for these communities. The intent of these funds was to help communities need the most to be able to get the resources. My understanding, though, is that some communities feel like there's been other priorities put in there with regard to climate rather than the safe drinking water. Is that something that you feel is being pushed in the legislation because that was not Congress's intent, or do you people are just taking this the wrong way? I mean, what's kind of your response when you hear some of those criticisms?
I do think it is a misunderstanding, Senator. We have been very clear in our implementation memo and in all of our discussions that the states are in the driver's seat in making decisions around the SRF program because they know what communities need those resources the most. So we've been clear on that. We certainly encourage climate considerations, but it's not a requirement. Certainly in places like Oklahoma, drought is a top concern. So certainly projects that are going to help water supply diversification and conservation, groundwater reuse and recharge, these are things that are going to really matter in communities. But no, the states are in the driver's seat as far as selecting projects.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Senator Ricketts, thanks for joining. Senator Sullivan, good morning. Welcome.
Ms. Fox, I want to start with a chart here that I've trotted out a lot in this committee room. This is a chart of life expectancy in America and in Alaska in particular for the last 25 years, from 1980 to 2014. You see where the blue and dark blue is, that's life expectancy going up a lot. Actually, yellow, orange, red, actually life expectancy has decreased. That's really sad in America. Mostly that's been due to the opioid epidemic that's killed so many Americans. But my state, particularly in the rural regions, the North Slope, the interior, Aleutian Island chain, has had the largest life expectancy increases of any place in the country in the last 25 years, up to 13 years in many of our rural areas. So that's a great indicator of policy success. Why do you think that happened? Now, it's a hard question, but 1980 to 2014, what else happened in Alaska during that time? I'll just answer it. It's not an easy question. So we had a very big boom in resource development, oil and gas, mining. So when I get upset about these issues, when federal agencies try to shut down resource development in my state, it's literally a matter of life and death. The communities in rural Alaska that have benefited from that, they're living longer. And I don't know if there's any policy indicator of success more important than are the people you representing living longer. Would you agree with me?
Yes.
Anything more important than that? No, I don't think so either. So one of the things that's frustrating, we just went through this Willow process. The vast majority of the Alaska Native people were supportive. The national media hated to write that story. They kept canceling the voices of the indigenous people in Alaska, but we finally got it out there. And one of the big reasons is because of this, right? They know it's jobs, pride, things that most communities take for granted, like running water, flush toilets. You get infrastructure, you get jobs, you get revenues, you can do those things that in parts of my state, people haven't had access to for a long time, maybe ever. So let me talk about a related area, but it's all in this area too. It's mining. And unfortunately, the administration on a number of mining projects, the Ambler Mining District in particular, we did a 7-year EIS, $10 million. The same day the president held a critical minerals summit at the White House on the importance of cutting our dependence on foreign critical minerals like from China, they reversed that EIS in Alaska. Now that was the Department of Interior. Secretary Holland seems hell-bent on reversing everything, despite that chart. It's kind of remarkable that she would be doing that. But the EPA recently finalized its 404C action on Pebble, the preemptive veto action. But you said, quote, it's also important to note that the EPA's action does not apply to current or future resource development projects in Alaska. Similarly, Administrator Reagan said, by no means is this decision meant to send any signals beyond this specific progress or project. So can you begin by recommitting to me that EPA won't use 404C as a precedent to stop future Alaska projects or, importantly, anything that has already previously been permitted in Alaska, keeping this in mind. Because when you do that, when Deb Haaland recently reversed the Ambler decision, she actually yesterday reversed the King Cove Road decision. There's no native project that people in Alaska care about that she doesn't reverse. The native people, by the way. Again, stunning to me. But can you recommit to what you and the administrator already said with regard to mining projects in my state?
Yes, and Senator Sullivan, it is good to see you again. I was just thinking the last time, seeing your map, the last time that we were together was at the Bethel Airport
Right.
this past summer when we were both visiting an Alaska Native village that were working on water infrastructure projects. So it's good to see you again. And yes, to be clear, EPA has sparingly used our 404C authority only 3 times in the last 30 years, 3 times, that's it. And yes, I commit, as does Administrator Regan, that it will be sparingly used. We were very clear that 404C action was about a particular mine in a particular geography, a geography to Bristol Bay, beautiful and unique ecosystem.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to interrupt. I just have one final question. I spoke at the annual conference of the Tanana Chiefs Conference yesterday in Interior Alaska. And I talked about water and sewer and the needs to get some of the communities. We have 30 communities in Alaska that don't have flush toilets and running water. By the way, these are some of the most patriotic communities in America because Alaska Natives serve at higher rates in the military than any other ethnic group in the country. So can you recommit to me, given the resources and the infrastructure bill? I told them that you're going to be working with us on getting rid of what we call honey buckets, which is a euphemism for people having to go to the bathroom and then take their own waste out and throw it in a lagoon. Pretty disgusting. American citizens still do that in my state. Can you recommit to me to help us get rid of the honey bucket once and for all?
Absolutely. I mean, seeing firsthand people living with honey buckets, with washaterias. When I visited Alaska last August, I am absolutely committed to this. And I think we have the ability to make tremendous progress because of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the incredible leadership that President Biden and this Congress have made in investing $50 billion. So you have my absolute commitment on that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. In the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, Ms. Fox, Congress committed to ensure that disadvantaged communities benefit from federal drinking water and wastewater infrastructure investments. The Biden administration has made the same pledge through its Justice 40 initiative. State policies such as project ranking systems and additional eligibility criteria can create barriers to disadvantaged and underserved communities' ability to access funds. Here's my question. Is EPA tracking these state-level barriers? And what is the agency's plan to help communities overcome these barriers so that they can access federal investment in water infrastructure?
Thank you for that question. And yes, Senator, we are tracking those barriers and working actively with individual states as well as with CIFA, the Council of Infrastructure Financing Authorities, to collaboratively develop solutions to those barriers. I think the states and EPA, we share a commitment to making sure that we make these resources available to as many communities as possible. And things like the project, ranking system, it is a barrier in some states. There's other barriers that exist as well. For example, we have some states, for example, have only an annual application process, while other states allow for multiple rounds of submission of SRFs. That's another thing. I think there's challenges around local communities knowing when to apply and having full transparency into that process. So there are a range of barriers, as there are with many funding and financing programs across the federal government. And so we are very closely partnering with the states to work through those together. And one thing I can also say is there's an incredible amount of peer exchange and learning that's happening right now across states. There's trainings and opportunities for the states to come together to learn from one another, and we want to support and encourage that as much as possible as well.
All right, thank you. One of the Biden administration's priorities has been to replace lead service lines. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law included, I think it was $15 billion in funding for full lead service line replacements. A lot of money. In the years leading up to the passage of that law, we heard from several states, including my own state of Delaware, that the prevalence of lead service lines was not a significant problem. However, as some of those states started doing lead inventories, it became clear that the presence of lead pipes and the health impacts they cause is more pervasive than a lot of folks expected. Question, given this initial skepticism, have the states been able to use the funding for lead service line replacements?
So I think one of the most exciting aspects of this job and serving in this capacity is to help deliver on President Biden's commitment to get the lead out once and for all. Just so remarkable, the president's leadership on this issue. And, you know, at the EPA, we are using every tool in our toolbox to deliver on that. You know, as it relates to your question, Senator, you know, the reaction is mixed. There are some states that feel that their allocation of lead service line money is insufficient for the need. Others think that the allocation is too much, given how much the need is there. So we're in constant conversation with the states to understand that. We do have what's called a reallotment process that we can utilize, so that after 2 years, if a state doesn't use their lead service line money, we can reallocate it to a state that could use it. So right now, we're in the process of working with the states to make sure that they know they can use this money to support, you know, the inventory development, because that's the first thing to really understand the nature of and scope of the problem, to start those replacement projects. But then, yes, after those 2 years, if states don't utilize those resources, we will be able to reallocate.
All right, thank you. My last question to you today deals with the private wells. My family grew up in West Virginia and largely in Virginia. We always had private wells, and I think a lot of folks around the country still do, and a lot of folks are having private wells drilled for them and for their families and their farms in some cases. The presence of contaminated private well water is becoming a problem nationwide, as you know. In Delaware, we know that about 173,000 residents depend on private wells. Most people think we don't have that many people in Delaware, but we do. We got 1 million people now, and there's about 173,000 residents who depend on private wells for their drinking water. This number is actually growing, not shrinking. Congress included language in the Drinking Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Act to allow EPA to give grants to states to address underground sources of contamination impacting wells. Unfortunately, EPA has determined it cannot implement the language except to connect homeowners to a regulated water utility, which, as you know, is not always feasible. Because wells are managed by the states, Congress does not expect EPA to take on the regulation of wells under the Safe Drinking Water Act. Having said that, Congress did expect EPA to help states address these sources of contaminated drinking water. I'm just going to ask if you would be willing to commit today to working with this committee on Environment and Public Works to help address well contamination by providing resources to states.
Absolutely commit to that. This is a shared concern around protecting public health, and happy to work more closely with this committee on this issue moving forward.
All right. Is there any question you wish you had been asked that you have not been asked? This is a freebie. What do you wish you'd been asked?
Well, my
that you were
favorite
not
question
asked?
to ask people is, what's your favorite body of water?
All right. Now that I'm the only one here, I mean, what would that be?
The Pacific Ocean.
Oh, no kidding. That's great. Well, that's hard to argue with that one. Hard to argue with that one. Okay. I think That's it for my questions for you today. I just want to thank you again for being here, for your responses, and for the work that's gone on. Just to convey to your team our thanks, especially for the work on permanent chemicals. That's one that's of great importance to the ranking member and me, and I think to all of us. I tell the story, and with this we'll close and move to the next panel. I spent a lot of my life in airplanes, Navy airplanes, and I literally witnessed a terrible tragedy at Moffett Field Naval Air Station when I was on active duty, when we had two runways, side-by-side parallel runways, and we shared the base with NASA, NASA airplanes. And our P-3s were smaller four-engine airplane, but not as big as the ones that NASA flew. And early one morning, two planes were coming down to land on simultaneously on the two parallel runways. Navy P-3 on the right, a NASA aircraft, larger aircraft on the left. Both planes were cleared to land, as it turned out, on the same runway. And the large NASA plane crushed the P-3 and killed about 18 people. Firefighters rushed out to try to save the lives. 18 people died. About 20 years later, I'm driving in Delaware, living in Delaware, driving down Route 13, heading, or actually to Route 1, heading for Rehoboth, in that area. And I go by, approaching the Dover Air Force Base, which is on the left as you head south on Route 1, and I could see black smoke coming up from the Air Force Base. And a C-5, which is a huge aircraft, C-5 cargo plane, which is fully loaded with gas and fuel, and cargo had tried to take off from Dover Air Force Base. And in the climb out to altitude, the flight engine, they have four engines on the C-5, and they got an engine warning light on one of the four engines. The flight engineer shut down the wrong engine, so instead of having four engines working, they had two. They had a full bag of fuel, fully loaded, and they tried to come around and land on the runway before they lost all their altitude. They didn't make it, and they went in about a mile south of the approach end of the runway. All the firefighters coming out from all over the Dover Air Force Base just came out, covered the plane with foam, saved every life, and that's the good news. The bad news is in the wake of that, we have 4 communities around Dover Air Force Base who have contaminated water, drinking water. So something that was literally intended to save lives has, as it turns out, inhibited the quality of life. And we're still dealing with that in Delaware. We're dealing with it in West Virginia, and just very pleased with the attention that the issue has received, and hopefully will continue to receive. Again, thank you very much. Senator Capito, anything else you want to say before? Thank you. All right, thank you so much. And with that, we'll welcome our second panel. Thank you, ma'am. Well, good morning. I think I've had an opportunity to welcome you all individually. We're delighted that you're here. Thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your service as well. Randy Heeman is Commissioner and CEO of the Philadelphia Water Department, a role he was appointed to in 2019 by, we'll see who's calling. I hope it's my wife. It is not. In any event, Mr. Heeman, Commissioner and CEO of the Philadelphia Water Department, is role he's appointed, what was it, 2019? 2019 by Mayor Jim Kenney. And we consider you a neighbor right up the road. And I appreciate all that you tell the mayor we are asking for him, give him our best. And thank you for joining us today. Go right ahead.
Thank you. Chairman Carper and Ranking Member Capito, and members of the committee. Thank you for
I'm
the-
sorry, I know, people call me, I call me Carpo, even in this hearing, but her name is Capito.
I'm sorry.
Just so you know, Capito.
Capito.
I tell people I've been called things worse than Carpo, so, but her name is Capito. Thank you.
Again, Chairman Carper, Ranking Member Capito, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the critical new resources and assistance being delivered by the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and the Drinking Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Act, commonly known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or the bill. As the Commissioner and CEO of Philadelphia Water Department, and as a member of the Board of Directors of the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies, I know that the nation is long overdue for a landmark investment in water infrastructure. So I want to begin my testimony by commending this committee for its leadership in developing the drinking water and wastewater components of the BIL and the cooperative open door engagement with AMWA and other water sector stakeholders that was a hallmark of this process. This bill was the model of how both parties and sector stakeholders can work together to find common ground, and this is why the initial DWIWA, the Drinking Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Act legislation, passed the Senate with a vote of 89-2 before being incorporated into the larger bill. But this is all about how we got here. Today, I want to focus my comments on the on-the-ground benefits that resources provided by the infrastructure law are providing to my community. For background, in 2019, Philadelphia completed its water revitalization plan, a 25-year, multi-billion-dollar strategic vision for upgrading our city core's drinking water infrastructure. The plan contains an estimated 400 necessary projects, including rebuilding water treatment plants and replacing pumping stations and transmission mains, while leveraging low-cost financing opportunities to keep rates affordable for our customers. And to be honest, the financing component represents one of the hardest aspects of the plan. We know what to do. We know what work we need to do to strengthen our city's water infrastructure. Our engineers are smart and they are dedicated. What is not as apparent is how the city can pay for it without raising our water and sewer rates to unsustainable levels. Fortunately, passage of the DUA came at an opportune time as our city was working to implement this plan. And last month, President Biden announced that Philadelphia will receive $500 million in financing through several different programs authorized and funded by.
Would you say that amount again? Well, how much was that?
$500 million.
All right.
A significant amount.
Yeah.
And this includes $160 million through Pennsylvania's share of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law funds to upgrade treatment facilities and replace more than 19 miles of water mains and any lead service lines discovered during this work. Additionally, in January, Philadelphia closed on a $19.8 million loan from EPA's WIFIA program. This will support the replacement of 15 miles of water mains and approximately 160 lead service lines throughout the city at lower financing costs than we otherwise would have faced. This loan represents just the first stage of a $340 million worth of WIFIA assistance promised to Philadelphia by EPA. These future investments will be paid for by subsequent rounds of WIFIA loans. So this is why it's so essential that Congress reauthorize WIFIA as part of the DWIA and set a course for the program's stability for years to come. And while WIFIA has become consistently funded by Congress, DWIA established or extended multiple other water, wastewater infrastructure funding programs, many of which are still waiting meaningful investments and appropriations by Congress or implementation by EPA. One such program is EPA's mid-size and large drinking water system infrastructure and resilience and sustainability program, which will help drinking water systems prepare to withstand the effects of natural disasters and cybersecurity threats. AMWA championed creation of this program alongside Senator Ben Cardin, and we are pleased to see it received an initial $5 million appropriation in the final fiscal year 2023 spending legislation. However, the national need is much greater than $5 million, and the water systems across the country are still waiting for EPA to stand up the program. AMWA urges EPA to move with diligence to make this program operational and to request full funding in future budget requests. Finally, let me conclude with few areas where I think the funding and programs provided by WIA and bill can be made even more effective. First, we greatly appreciate the law authorized a new low-income water wastewater assistance pilot program at EPA. Water affordability is a national need, and it should be part of the federal safety net. AMWA urges EPA to quickly complete its required national water affordability needs assessment so that the pilot program can be funded and put to work. We would also appreciate more clarity and consistency in relation to which communities are eligible to receive additional subsidized SRF funding provided by the bill. EPA has specified that this is available to disadvantaged communities, but due to several factors, Philadelphia Water cannot assess grants or principal forgiveness through the Penn Vest State Revolving Fund, most prominently due to the affordability methodology used. This means that the loans currently being provided through the bill funding will have to be repaid through higher water bills in Philadelphia and other communities facing similar hurdles. AMWA would be interested in working to establish clear and consistent baseline standards to ensure low-income populations can benefit from this aid, no matter what size community they are in. Again, I thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. AMWA was honored to work with the Committee on Development of the Infrastructure Legislation, and the Philadelphia Water Department is proud to be among its first recipients. I have submitted my full statement for the record, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
That's great. We're going to hear from the other witnesses, and I'll come back and ask some questions. Thanks again for your presence, and thank you again for your testimony today.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Tom Sigmund, the Executive Director of NEW, N-E-W, New Water. What is NEW? Is that an acronym?
It can be for several things, either Northeast Wisconsin or new in that we take wastewater and provide a new product, which are resource recovery and clean water.
All right, good. Executive Director, a regional clean water utility in Green Bay, Wisconsin. One of the most exciting exhibition football games I ever saw was in Green Bay. And you'd have thought they were playing for the Super Bowl. It was in August, but they were so pumped.
Is that the one you played in?
That's the one I should have played in. I don't think so. But Mr. Sigmund, you are recognized to give your statement. Thanks a lot for joining us and for what you do. Take it away.
Chairman Carper, Ranking Member Capito, and members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to appear at today's hearing. Again, my name is Tom Sigmund. I serve as President of the Board of the Directors of the National Association of Clean Water Agencies, and I'm also Executive Director at New Water, the brand of the Green Bay Metropolitan Sewerage District in Green Bay, Wisconsin, where I've been since 2007. New Water is a regional clean water utility providing wholesale conveyance and treatment services to 238,000 people across 15 municipalities in Northeast Wisconsin. We have 101 employees, an annual budget of $49 million, and maintain a 20-year capital improvement plan of $470 million in 2021 dollars. Our utility views the material sent to its facilities as a valuable resource to be recovered and reused, and we are committed to continued improvement in the watershed. For over 50 years, NACWA has represented public wastewater and stormwater agencies nationwide and that are on the front lines of public health and environmental protection. Our unique and growing network of 350 public agency members works to ensure public utilities have the tools necessary to provide affordable and sustainable clean water for all. As part of that mission, NACWA has long advocated for the federal government to recommit to a full and reliable partnership with local communities to invest in and build critical water infrastructure. In this country, local customers and ratepayers have paid for the overwhelming majority of investment in water and sewer infrastructure. Not surprisingly, the costs of providing clean and safe water have been growing for years, and by extension, rates have been also increasing to meet this cost. This can be a significant hardship for many in our communities, and those of us responsible for setting or influencing rates take this very seriously. The historic water infrastructure investments in WIA and IIJA, which is commonly referred to as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or bill, can offer much-needed help to local governments working to juggle these dynamics. NACWA has engaged with EPA on implementation, and we are encouraged by the efforts of Administrator Regan and Assistant Administrator Fox on this major undertaking to implement the statute expeditiously and ensure it achieves the goals set forth by Congress. My full written comments, along with a recent funding report NACWA has released last July, have been provided to you, so I'll try to keep my remarks brief. I first want to discuss the importance of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund, commonly known as CWSRF. NACWA applauds the bipartisan commitment WEA has made to the CWSRF through both direct appropriations and increases to authorized annual funding. These funds are invaluable to POTWs. Nearly all of the FY22 CWSRF general capitalization grants have gone out to the states, and EPA recently announced the FY23 supplemental funding that each state CWSRF should expect to receive due to bill. However, in fiscal year 22 and 23, Congress has not appropriated at the full levels authorized in bill, only 60% in fiscal year 23, which reduces the overall impact Congress sought to make with this investment package. NACWA is discouraged by the request within President Biden's recently released budget for fiscal year 24, calling for a level funding of the CWSRF with last fiscal year, rather than the increase that Congress authorized in bill, which would be $3 billion for next year. NACWA continues to urge full funding for the CWSRF in each fiscal year. The next issue is PFAS. Utilities are extremely concerned about the potential health and environmental risks associated with exposure to PFAS and what it may mean for the future of public clean water utility operations. An important provision in bill was the allocation of funds for emerging contaminants, including PFAS, through the CWSRF. POTWs are concerned about the looming costs that they may face to manage or dispose of these contaminants, which water utilities passively receive and did not create or profit from. As a new pot of funding, these bill resources are predictably seeing a slower approval rate than traditional SRF funding. To my knowledge, approximately half of the states have received these FY22 awards to date. One obstacle to getting these funding plans approved and funds distributed quickly is that many of the most immediate costs utilities face include monitoring, assessing, and implementing pretreatment programs. However, these important steps are not clearly eligible under the SRF, which focuses on capital investments. State SRFs have the authority to request full transfer of CWSRF funds designated for emerging contaminants to be applied to accounts for drinking water. For this fiscal year, several states have opted to pursue this transfer, Wisconsin included. This option allows states flexibility to prioritize their most immediate emerging contaminant needs, but this should not suggest that clean water utilities will not also face significant costs to help control and remediate PFAS in their communities. NACWA is working with EPA and utilities to identify potential near-term uses that are allowed under the CWSRF. However, congressional clarity or a distinct pot of funding focused on helping communities assess PFAS sources entering their wastewater streams may be needed. Another issue that I have is how to support customers and ratepayers in need of low-income water assistance and address affordability challenges. Bill directed EPA to conduct a national low-income water needs assessment, which has since been appropriated funding. This needs assessment will help Congress and the public understand the full scope of national hardship in paying water and sewer bills. However, it may not be complete for several years, and in the meantime, households continue to struggle. To help address this challenge, NACWA strongly supports a permanent, reliable source of federal assistance with full funding to ensure households can afford their water and sewer bills and utilities have the resources they need to make critical investments. Finally, NACWA and I appreciate the opportunity to share our views on the implementation of WEA and IJA. I am proud of the work that the public wastewater sector has accomplished to date to advance public health and environmental protection. Our nation's understanding of the complexity of water quality challenges only continues to grow. I hope that my testimony shows how these investment packages are providing initial investments in making our wastewater infrastructure safer and more resilient and responsive to new threats like emerging contaminants, while emphasizing the vast need for funding and how we hope this investment is only a start. We sincerely hope this increased federal cost share for water will become the groundwork for greater federal investment to meet our growing water challenges in the years ahead. Continued resources and assistance from the federal government are critical to ensure that all water and wastewater utilities are prepared to meet the challenges of today and tomorrow, starting with full funding of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Sigmund. Appreciate your testimony. We'll now turn to Ms. Kathy Emery. Kathy is the Director of the Division of Water and Waste Management at the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection. Welcome to you. I'm glad that you're here from my home state of West Virginia, and I understand the legislature just put another responsibility onto you as well, so thank you for taking that on, whether you wanted it or not.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Carper, Ranking Member Capito, and all members of the committee for the opportunity to testify before you on the Drinking Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Act, which was included in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. My name is Catherine Emery, and I am the Director of the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection's Division of Water and Waste Management. I have either worked in or managed West Virginia's Clean Water State Revolving Fund for the past 28 years. I am truly honored to represent West Virginia today to discuss with you the funding opportunities provided in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, as well as current water infrastructure challenges and ongoing unmet needs in small, rural, and disadvantaged communities. Considering that only 50 of West Virginia's combined 671 drinking water and wastewater utilities serve a population of greater than 10,000, I think it is safe to say that West Virginia is on the front lines of facing the challenges of meeting the needs of small, rural, and disadvantaged communities. The difficulties to providing services to these communities is very real. The reality of small numbers of customers, topographical challenges, and low incomes make it very difficult to find an affordable solution to meet the needs of residents. Even with 100% principal forgiveness and grant funding, customers find the rates to support only the operation and maintenance expenses a challenge. In addition, our communities are also struggling to find and pay qualified operators. Infrastructure needs cover providing safe drinking water and treated wastewater to unserved communities, upgrading old and failing infrastructure, locating and addressing lead service lines, and preparing to meet upcoming PFAS standards as well as any other new regulatory initiatives. The supplemental funding from the Act means a lot to our communities that are trying to address these challenges. For example, the number of applicants for our project priority list jumped from 101 to 175 in the Clean Water SRF and from 29 to 157 in the Drinking Water SRF, as our communities are preparing to take full advantage of this historic opportunity. West Virginia has been utilizing multiple approaches to address these issues. Co-funding and collaboration with other funding agencies and providing technical assistance are some of the tools that we're using to fully utilize all available state and federal dollars to provide safe drinking water and treated wastewater to as many citizens as possible. With that being said, I ask for your consideration of a few suggestions to help us be even more effective in funding projects to meet the intent of the Act. The most effective part of the SRF programs is the flexibility to tailor the programs to meet individual state needs. States must have the ability to determine their own definition of disadvantage and develop their own priority criteria to best meet the needs of the citizens of their states. Each of the changes and new initiatives crafted within the Act also need to maintain that flexibility. As you can see from my written testimony, there are several suggestions for additional flexibility that, if provided, can help states maximize the utilization of this funding to fit their individual situations. It has been my experience that when working with small utilities and communities without access to adequate water and wastewater infrastructure, situations and needs arise that have never really been contemplated. That is why it is so critical that we be very cautious about writing policies and guidance documents that limit the abilities of the SRFs and other funding agencies to adapt to changing needs. The one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work when trying to apply solutions that work for large existing utilities to communities trying to either improve or provide service to, at most, hundreds of customers. Thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to discuss these issues with you today. The problem is always finding a sustainable and affordable solution to communities with small numbers of customers, and the funding provided through this Act will help us to address this problem with many disadvantaged and unserved areas. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Emery, and thank all three of you. The reason it looks kind of blank up here, we're in the middle of a vote. So Chairman Carper went to make his vote, so I'll take the time to do my questioning, and then I'll have to leave and do my constitutional duties. So, Ms. Emery, let's get to the flexibility issue. You heard me ask Assistant Administrator Fox about this. There was a January 6th memo that EPA put out, a guidance memo, that encouraged and sort of sought to impose some EPA's priorities in selecting community investments. And this is what I was trying to say to her is exactly what you said much better in your statement. Leave us the flexibility to do what we want and what we know is best for our communities as we tailor them. What kind of challenges and concerns do you have that this EPA guidance may be trying to rein in some of your flexibility?
I am a little concerned by that memo. It was a bit of a surprise. I do want to start off by saying that, this past year, we had a lot of conversations with EPA Region 3. They are an excellent funding partner with West Virginia. They were asking questions about have we evaluated our affordability criteria, the prioritization criteria. EPA's guidance had a lot of suggestions for states to consider, and we did take advantage of those suggestions, and we did make adjustments in our intended use plan. But when I'm reading this memo and it's talking about additional criteria in addition to the intended use plan checklist, when it's talking about implementation of a priority criteria that they are developing in coming months, that they're going to be accessing our IUPs based against that.
So you haven't even seen that yet?
I have not seen it. It's saying it's in development. And so it has me a little concerned that there's going to be criteria that they're going to ask us to incorporate into our intended use.
So you could create your own plan, tailored to your own, as Congress intended, tailored to our state of West Virginia,
Yes.
and to our small disadvantaged communities and smaller communities, because that's basically what we are in a lot of ways, very small communities, that you formulate all this, you get your technical expertise together, you formulate the plan, it goes to EPA, and then all of a sudden they come back with criteria you haven't seen to say, but you're not doing this and this. Is that the concern? Am I hearing that correctly?
That is my concern. I'm wondering where this memo is taking us at this point.
Do they give you a time frame on that?
No, I do have, a list of questions. It's in the memo. We're set up to have a conversation with Region 3. But like I said, I have not seen whatever this priority criteria is that they're supposed to establish.
Mr. Sigmund, are you hearing this around across the country, same issue?
I'm not familiar with the most recent. Our experience with the State of Wisconsin Clean Water Fund has been very positive, and that's been over the last year. They have taken what they received from EPA. We have formed a working group with our Clean Water Fund, and they've expanded the definition of what is considered to be a disadvantaged community, but have not excluded those that are historical. So I am not as familiar with the most recent changes.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Emery, I think you and I can talk about it. I thought it was interesting that Senator Lummis talked about leakage of water out of small systems. We know that's a huge issue for us. We have some lead. We know that was discovered in the north central part of the state and is probably more predominant in other areas of the state. What do you think our biggest challenge specific to our state in water infrastructure is for these small and rural? Is it going to be the testing for PFAS as we see it come through, the destruction of PFAS? What are we going to do with it when we get it? How are we going to replace our filters? I'm naming some of the things, if you could see it from your perspective.
I think the primary thing is affordability and sustainability for our communities. When you are talking
For the systems or the individuals or both?
Yes, for
Okay.
all of the above. In addition to just what we're talking about in maintaining existing infrastructure, extending sewer services out to other communities, other areas. Now we're trying to assess the PFAS situation in West Virginia. Where is it? Where is the contamination coming from? And we're adding lead service lines on top of all of that. So it's a lot for all of these communities to take on, and we are working with them on these one by one. That is why the flexibility of the SRFs, I think, have to be maintained. Our communities, some of the more rural disadvantaged, trying to gather enough grant funding and debt forgiveness to support just the projects they have because they can't sustain debt service.
Right.
They're struggling just to pay the operation and maintenance.
Right, and the customers can't afford another rate hike. I mean, I know that's always part of the considerations.
An example for that is community of Yeager in McDowell County. As you
right.
know, it's one of our most economically distressed counties. We're finally getting a sewer system into Yeager. It's a combination of a lot of grant funding sources, but I was looking at the combined water and wastewater rate for those citizens, and it will be over $100 a month. It'll be over 3% of the median household income just for water and wastewater. That's without adding on other considerations going forward.
All right. Well, thank you. And I'm going to run do my vote, and I think Senator Ricketts is going to take the gavel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so since Senator Kelly just got here, I'm going to go ahead and ask my questions if that's okay. We just had a Republican go. If you want to go, I can let you go first.
I'm ready if you are okay with that, Senator.
Then I will let you go.
All right. So, good morning. Still got a couple minutes. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. Mr. Heyman and Mr. Sigmund, you know, last Congress, I worked with Senator Risch to introduce the Water Infrastructure Modernization Act, which would provide dedicated EPA funding for smart water and wastewater technologies, like pipeline leak detection systems and sensors and smart water meters. And we're hoping to reintroduce this legislation again and see progress made on the legislation during this Congress. So for both of you, can you both speak to how your systems use smart water technologies to reduce water loss and improve system efficiencies, and how would additional federal resources, such as through the Water Infrastructure Modernization Act, help water and wastewater systems further deploy these technologies?
I'll gladly take that question, Senator. It is important that as a water utility that we keep evolving. And one of the main things we have to do is use technology to our advantage and do it in a way that is economically feasible. Affordability is a big issue, but when we're able to use technology in the big picture to develop a system that is responsible to our customers, we're doing what is the right thing to do. Now, as far as smart technology, we have AMI, the Automated Meter Infrastructure Program, where we're able to get real-time information about your water usage. So you can go to the app, go to the website, and look and see what is my bill. So what happens in that situation, instead of having a running pipe, let's say a broken toilet, that you're not aware of in the basement and your bill is going up, you'll be able to go to the site and you'll see what your bill is. And that means, I think information truly is power and allows you to be more economically feasible, more sensible in how you're handling your household economics. But the bottom line, too, is also we have systems that allow us to hear leaks in pipes. We had a situation where there was a leakage, we couldn't find it. We used the technology, we're working still to pinpoint it, but we're a lot closer than we were before. So the use of technology is important, and the funding is imperative, because all of the things we want to do cost, and we're dealing in a situation where rates are getting higher and higher and becoming to a level not being sustainable for many in our communities. And so any monies that we're able to receive to allow us to assist the customer and to allow us to keep our rates low or not to increase at all is beneficial to the entire community.
Do you have any examples of, like, you know, percentage-wise or, you know, gallons or acre-feet of water that a specific investment has resulted in? Like any, like, anecdotal example?
I would have to go back and supplement the record after the hearing on that, but I must say that the AMI process of being able to have real-time information is truly important, and it's revolutionary in Philadelphia, because what's happening is that people can monitor their water usage, they can monitor if there's a leak in their pipe. It's a $100 million project, but it's going to be greatly beneficial for decades to come.
Mr. Sigmund?
So coming from a clean water utility, water loss is not a concern for us. But in the implementation of smart technology in our interceptor systems, we do use some of the smart meter covers to be able to identify during periods of wet weather events, high flows, that we might either reroute flows if that is possible, because oftentimes rainfall is not uniform across the service area, or to be able to deploy forces to potentially mitigate some of the problems with high flows. Within our treatment facilities, we are a huge energy user, and so we've used smart technologies to be able to analyze how we use energy and possibly tie it to some of our aeration equipment to maybe slow down some of the aeration equipment when it's not needed to run at quite the full capacity. The ability to mine this tremendous amount of information that we collect tons of information, and our staff can only manage so much. We have gone to technologies to be able to predict where we would go, which helps our operators make better decisions. So the smart technology in wastewater utilities is being used, and it is being beneficial. And I mentioned with staffing, as we are struggling to continue to find treatment operators, maintenance, and electrician technicians, that smart technology is allowing us to stretch those forces a little farther.
Thank you. And thank you, Senator Ricketts. And I yield
You
back
yield what?
the time that I
You
don't
don't
have.
any time to yield back.
I yield back nothing.
I accept it. All right, Senator Ricketts, you're in it for the second round, I think.
Thank you, Chairman.
thanks.
Actually, this is the first time with this panel.
All right. Okay.
First time.
Good.
We had Administrator Fox here earlier talking about PFAS, and so I'm going to give you all a question really along for the entire panel. What types of tools would be helpful in addressing the impacts to water infrastructure that, especially I'm concerned particularly about rural communities, when it comes to PFAS, and what are some of the tools that you've seen that are going to be helpful as we go through this rulemaking to be able to make sure communities can comply? So just whichever one wants you to start first. Do you want to start, Mr. Heyman?
Well, with PFAS, I think a couple of things. One, it's important that we understand what are we looking at, that we understand what the numbers are. We're going to be receiving a lot of new data on PFAS, so it's important that we work closely with the scientists and engineers to see what does that really mean. The other part of it is that anything that we do with PFAS is going to be an additional cost. It's going to be an additional burden to the ratepayer. And so it's going to be imperative that we receive some funding to assist us in making sure that we're not putting upon the ratepayer a burden that they can't carry or additional bills that they'd have to cover. Basically, though, I would say that we're going to have to work with our engineers to evaluate it, to make sure we have the machinery to do it. Now, I have to say this, and I'm very proud of Philadelphia. We're often on the cutting edge, and on this issue, we are on the cutting edge of evaluating PFAS. We have been doing that voluntarily for over a year, and we have been putting the information that we find on our website. And also, too, we have been transparent. And I think, too, that's going to be a major part of being successful as a water utility in this country, that we cannot go back to how we operated in the 1950s, 1960s. There's a need to be transparent, and we have done that as far as releasing information and keeping the public informed. So I think we have to make sure we have the machinery we need and the equipment we need to analyze it. We have to understand what we're looking at, and then we have to be transparent as far as releasing information and educating the public on what we have.
And so do you have an idea of how much, just ballpark, what it's going to cost to be able to do that?
I don't know, and in all honesty, the law just changed, or the requirements just changed yesterday. It is now 4 parts per trillion. Before, it was in Philadelphia, I think it was about 14 parts per trillion. So we're going to have to evaluate it and make decisions as we go forward.
Great, thank you. Mr. Sigmund?
So we are just in the process of starting an evaluation, data collection and evaluation process for PFAS in our system. We're expecting to spend between our utility and working with our significant industrial dischargers who we believe might discharge PFAS, probably in the vicinity of $100,000 to $200,000 a year for the testing and the analysis. So that's going to be the first step for us to try to understand where this is coming from. That testing process is not easy. The analysis process is not inexpensive, so that's a big part of it. One thing I wanted to mention, probably the biggest concern for myself as a utility, is CERCLA in terms of from PFAS. As the rule is currently written, wastewater utilities, even though the EPA says they do not plan to call us as a principal responsible party, My utility experience with PCBs over about two decades was that we spent in excess of $1 million to both through legal fees as well as being considered to be a de minimis party. So yes, EPA says we're not going to consider you to be a principal responsible party, but that doesn't mean that the principal responsible parties won't come after us for contribution. And that is, I think, going to be one of the biggest concerns for utilities, is being brought into that entire process, and that's why we hope that Congress will grant an exemption to clean water utilities.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Emery. Ms. Emery, I'm sorry, Mr. Sigmund. Ms. Emery?
I do share some of Mr. Sigmund's concerns on the part of the utilities. In West Virginia, we've spent the last couple of years doing an assessment of all raw drinking water sources in the state, just to try to determine where this is located, at least starting with the drinking water utilities. We're doing further analysis, further testing, finished water, trying to find out the source of the contamination. That being said, we're trying to be very strategic on how we address this, where it's located, where it is coming from. So one of the suggestions we would have is allowing more monitoring to be used out of this emerging contaminants funding. It does say that we can use monitoring, but it has to be specifically tied to an upcoming project. But our POTWs are worried about the expense of monitoring on themselves. So the flexibility to use this funding to do just monitoring and studies, just to figure out the realm of the problem we have, would be very beneficial.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Chairman?
Senator Ricketts, that's it for you, my friend. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and that might be it. Thanks for being here twice for 2 rounds. That's good. Thank you. Let me see. I've got 3 questions. We have 3 panelists. I'm going to ask each of you a question. And we'll start, Mr. Heeman, with you again. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which I think I can speak for my colleagues and I, here's one of the things we're proudest of that we've worked on in our lives. And it was a great bipartisan triumph with the leadership of the President, Democrats and Republicans. But Bipartisan Infrastructure Law provided more than $11 billion to the Drinking Water State Revolving Loan Fund over 5 years. The law also dictates that some 49% of each state's annual funding allocation, this is a quote, shall be used by the state to provide grants, forgiveness of principal, or a combination of both, close quote. Whether a project is eligible for grant from the SRF as opposed to a loan is determined by each state's own rules on the subject. Some of the state-determined affordability criteria, however, prevent large cities like Philadelphia from being able to receive grants or loan forgiveness for water infrastructure projects that would benefit low-income, disadvantaged, and minority communities living within a larger metropolitan area. Here's my question. Has Philadelphia had trouble accessing the grant funding provided for in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law? And what kind of projects do you think these grant funds could support if the affordability criteria was changed? Go ahead. Hey, just go ahead and turn your mic on. We want to hear every word.
Thank you very much for the question. The bottom line is, yes, we're having difficulty in receiving grants from the Pinvest State Revolving Fund, and primarily because of the way that they determine economic feasibility or accountability. Basically, what they're saying is that our rates are too low. And what's happening is they're looking at what the people are able to pay across the entire board. And while there might be one area that is richer than another, that throws or skews the numbers. And as a result, despite the size of Philadelphia, despite being the largest, one of the largest poorest cities in the country, we're in a situation where we're not able to obtain the grants. And as a result, we receive loans, and those loans then put a burden on the customer because those loans have to be repaid. Now, let me also add your second part, if I may, answer your second part.
You may.
When you stated that there is, what projects could we do? Oh, there's a plethora of projects that we have. As I said earlier, our engineers are smart and they have tons of projects that we could work on. One of them is our revitalization, water revitalization program that is going to turn around and have 400 projects that allow us to rebuild our water plants, our transmission mains, and make sure that we have the tunnels that we need to transport redundancy and transport the water across from different water utility parts. And so in the end, there are pipes that can be replaced, there are plants that can be repaired. There are a number of projects that we would use the monies for. And again, grants are better than the loans because they do not place an economic responsibility on the customer down the road. They don't have to be repaid.
Good, thank you. My second question, Mr. Sigmund. According to a report by the National Association of Clean Water Agencies and the Association of Metropolitan Water Agencies, it is estimated that drinking water and wastewater utilities will need an additional $448 billion, with a B, $448 billion to $944 billion between now and 2050 to make their systems more resilient to extreme weather events. The Drinking Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Investment Act created several new grant programs focused on providing resources to drinking water and wastewater utilities who wish to improve their system's resiliency to extreme weather events and other threats. While I was glad to see those programs receiving funding last year, the appropriated amount was well below the authorized level. Here's my question. Do you think it's important for Congress to fully fund the resiliency programs created in the Drinking Water and Wastewater Infrastructure Act? And how would those programs be used to address specific problems caused by climate change?
So in answer, yes, it is very important for Congress to fully fund these programs. What NACWA has provided to you is not an exaggeration. It is where we see the state of our infrastructure at. We are a very heavy capital infrastructure. We make it last a long time, but it doesn't last forever and needs to be replaced. The resiliency from climate change, in my utility, we have seen our system be stressed 3 times in the last 5 years at its maximum capacity. We were able to deliver service because we had all of our equipment able to be in service, which is not always the case because of maintenance. And so in addition to, we are seeing in our state of Wisconsin, in our area, not necessarily more rainfall throughout the year, maybe a little bit more, but it is coming at different times and with greater intensity, and our infrastructure needs to be upgraded to be able to handle these peak flows.
All right, thank you. I have one more question for Ms. Emery, but we've been joined by Senator Markey, and I'm going to yield to him for any questions you might have. Senator Markey, welcome. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for
Have you voted both twice?
I have voted, yes.
Right.
I have already voted. And have you voted?
Just once.
Okay, beautiful. Me too. So thank you. Thank you all so much. In 2021, a malicious actor hacked into a water treatment facility in Florida and increased the level of lye, an ingredient used in soap and fertilizer, in the water by over 11,000%. Fortunately, an operator noticed the intrusion, and that attack was a wake-up call. Strengthening the security of our clean water and wastewater systems is a complex task, but it starts with information. And that's why the Water Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or Water ISAC, is so important. Mr. Heyman, can you briefly explain to the committee the benefits of Water ISAC for water utilities, information sharing for utilities? Your microphone, yes.
The old adage that information is power comes to mind. Basically, the Water ISAC, by being a member with that organization, information regarding cybersecurity or weather issues, climate change issues, all come to one depository. So it's gathered, it's analyzed, it's distributed. and it ends up helping those who are members of it in being able to make analysis and make the right decisions. After the recent train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, Water ISAC disseminated a bevy of information to nearby communities about risk to water quality and protective actions they could take. So it really gives them real-time information. And again, information is power.
Thank you. Absolutely. Last week, I introduced the Water System Threat Preparedness and Resilience Act, which would provide funding for clean water and wastewater utilities to become members of Water ISAC. My legislation fills the critical funding gap for small water utilities to join this critical information sharing network and helps expand access to essential resources. Mr. Heyman, do you agree that Congress should pass the legislation so that we should increase the information sharing? Smaller utilities gain access to this information as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely, because the more organizations are able to have access to it, the better we are able to protect the health and safety of everyone.
Yeah. So these small water agencies, they deserve that
Absolutely.
same kind of information.
Because often they're left out and they need it the most. And so anything that opens up that door of opportunity, we should do.
Exactly. And what we just saw in East Palestine is a small community that had a terrible disaster.
Absolutely.
And so we don't need small water systems left out because they serve populations that could have the same kind of catastrophic circumstances. So thank you for protecting our infrastructure. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, he, in a poem, said, "Water, water everywhere, but not a drop to drink." And Coleridge was right. We all have a thirst for clean and safe drinking water, yet too many Americans go without access to it. In the wake of aging pipes and monitoring systems nationwide, small and disadvantaged communities face additional barriers to safe drinking water without the support needed to overcome them. Communities of color are 40% more likely to have drinking water systems that consistently fail to meet safety standards in our country. And to address that clog in the system in 2019, I introduced the CLEAR Act, legislation to provide more support for disadvantaged communities with additional financial assistance for new provisions allowing communities to purchase filters or hire technical expertise. And I was very glad to see these key provisions included in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And thanks to the leadership of our chair and our bipartisan work with the administration, this funding and other resources are getting out the door and into our pipes. More than $10 million in EPA funding has been awarded, for example, to Fall River, Massachusetts, after decades of neglect to help remove lead service lines throughout the city. So again, Mr. Heyman, will more appropriated funds for the small, underserved, and disadvantaged communities grant program help more of those communities to get the safe drinking water which they're entitled to, as well as the large cities?
Absolutely. And it's because the needs of our water utilities are large and expanding. They do not simply stop. They are not stagnant. For example, in the last 15 years, we've had about 700 water main breaks. And that means in the last 5 years, it's been, what, 7,000, I mean to say, or 4,000, I should say, water main breaks. They need to be repaired. We have, again, with our water revitalization plan, we have to basically tear down one treatment plant and rebuild it. And so these are expensive projects that need to be done because so much of our system is at the end of life. And so if we're able to receive grants, that helps. Any monies that we receive allow us to lessen the burden that's placed on our citizens, our customers.
Yeah, so only $30 million was appropriated last year for small and disadvantaged communities, even though $60 million was authorized in the bipartisan law. So we have to work harder. We have to get that money so that the smaller communities, the disadvantaged communities in our country, get the protections that they deserve for their water supply as well. So thank you all so much for all your great work. Thank you, Mr. Heyman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Markey, thank you. I know you got a lot going on today. Thank you for making time to be here and for all of your work on this legislation. Thank you very much. I want to close by thanking each of you for joining us. Some who came as far away as Philadelphia, and it's just up the road from where my family and I live. And some who came from my native state of West Virginia, and were delighted. And then one who came from the one of the great football venues. And if I had time to ask one more question, I'd ask you about the future of Aaron Rodgers on the Green Bay Packers, but we don't have time for that. We can talk later, if you will. But on a more serious note, I just want to say thank you. This is a serious issue, as you know. Some people ask me why we concentrate a lot on water in this committee. It's without water, we don't have anything. We don't have life. We don't have a good quality of life. And it's just incredibly important for our planet and for all of us who are fortunate enough to share this planet. And speaking of shared, there's a shared responsibility with respect to providing water sanitation, wastewater sanitation, clean drinking water. It's not all on the federal government. It's not on state or local governments. It's not just all on the utilities. It's not just on customers, those of us who drink and use the water. It's a shared responsibility. We all have a role to play. And our hope is with the implementation of the bipartisan water and wastewater legislation that we passed, that we're going to be doing a better job at the federal level of meeting our responsibilities on this front. Senators are going to be allowed to submit written questions for the record, and they're going to be allowed to do that, I think, by 4 p.m. on Wednesday, March 29th, 4 p.m. on Wednesday, March 29th, which is about 2 weeks from today. And we'll compile those questions. We'll send them on to you, each of you, and ask you to try to respond to them, if you will, by Wednesday, April 12th. Wednesday, April 12th. So if you could do that for us, we'd be most grateful. In addition, we've received a number of statements for the record from a wide range of stakeholders. And I would ask unanimous consent at this time to enter these these statements into the record. I like to make unanimous consent requests when I'm the only senator in the room, because the only person who can object is me, and I never object to my own unanimous consent requests. So that would be a first that you would witness, but you're not going to see it today. But on a serious note, my mom passed away a number of years ago, from West Virginia, born right outside of Beckley in Raleigh County. And my mom's a deeply religious woman, and she used to drag my sister and me to church very close to where we lived, in Beaver, right outside of Beckley. And she would drag us to church every Sunday morning, every Sunday night, every Wednesday night, and most Thursday nights. And people say, do they have church on Thursday nights? Well, we did in Beaver, and we're there more often than not. And then she would take us home when we'd watch Billy Graham on TV. So one of the things my mom was really intent on instilling in my sister Sheila and me was golden rule: treat other people the way we want to be treated, which is really what we try to do with this legislation, if you will. And the other thing, a real focus on Matthew 25, looking out for the least of these. When I was thirsty, did you give me to drink? So I think we touched a lot of bases here today, but even some scriptural, and that leads me to close with the idea that there's a moral responsibility here as well. It's just not an economic imperative or nice to do imperative. There's a moral imperative here. And I think we're all trying to, regardless of what our faith is, I think we're all trying to meet and reach that moral imperative. And we thank you very much for being a part of all of that. And with that, I look forward to seeing, well, at least one of you up in Philadelphia, and another back in West Virginia. And I'm going to have to maybe go to another Packers football game. But I will never forget that spring training game. I've been to a bunch of Eagles games over the years. I thought those fans were pretty rabid, but not nearly as excited as the folks who were in Green Bay at an exhibition game. And with that, I think it's a wrap. With that, it's a wrap. We're adjourned. Thank you all very much.